It was a cold Monday morning in New York City, and the rain hadn't stopped since dawn. The gray clouds loomed heavy above, and the sidewalks glistened from the downpour. Inside a small, almost forgotten corner diner on the edge of Manhattan, the aroma of sizzling bacon, fresh coffee, and hope filled the air. The place was dimly lit, with cracked vinyl booths and flickering neon lights outside the window that read, "Open 24/7. Among the morning bustle, a young waitress named Lily moved between tables, balancing coffee pots and plates with one hand, while keeping an eye on the small boy sitting quietly at the last booth. He had tousled brown hair, a crooked smile, and wore thick leg braces that made it hard for him to stand. His name was Caleb, her 8-year-old son who had been born with cerebral palsy. They had no choice. Lily couldn't afford a nanny, and her shifts were too long to leave Caleb home alone. Her boss, begrudgingly, allowed her to bring him in, so long as he stayed quiet and out of the way. "Here you go, sweetie," she said, placing a warm grilled cheese sandwich in front of Caleb. She smiled gently, then quickly turned to refill a customer's coffee. Unbeknownst to her, in the farthest corner of the diner, a man sat silently behind a newspaper. He had been watching, not in a creepy way, but with curiosity. He had noticed the boy. He had noticed her. His name was William Kane, a billionaire, but not the kind of billionaire that walked around in gold watches and custom suits. No, William preferred to blend in. He believed you could learn more about the world in an old diner than from the top of a skyscraper. He wasn't supposed to be there. His driver had taken a wrong turn. He was just killing time until his next meeting. But something about the place, and more specifically, something about them, held his attention. He watched as Lily gently fixed Caleb's collar. He noticed how she cut his sandwich into smaller pieces so he could eat with ease. He watched the boy giggle when she made a silly face and gave him a ketchup smile on the plate. She was exhausted, anyone could see that. Yet, she never let it show around her son. "Can I get you more coffee, sir?" she asked, appearing at William's table with a tired but genuine smile. He looked up, folding his newspaper neatly. "Yes, please," he replied, then glanced at her name tag. "Lily, you've been sitting here for a while," she said, pouring the coffee. "Not many people come in this early unless they have nowhere else to be." William chuckled. "Sometimes nowhere else is exactly where I want to be." She smiled again and turned to leave, but he wasn't done. "That's your son, right?" he asked. She froze, halfway through her pivot. "Yes," she replied, a bit hesitant now. "Is that a problem?" "Not at all," he said calmly. "I just noticed. You seem like a really good mom." She wasn't used to compliments, especially not from well-dressed strangers. She gave a polite nod, muttered a quiet thank you, and walked away. William watched her go. He looked again at the boy. Caleb had the kind of eyes that seemed too deep for his age, eyes that had already seen too much. When the rush slowed down, Lily returned to check on Caleb. She pulled a tiny book from her apron pocket and started reading to him. It was a worn-out fairy tale book, with pages almost falling apart. Caleb leaned into her, his eyes wide with wonder. And William Kane knew then he had to do something. But what he did, no one could have predicted. The next day, the diner received a call. The owner answered. "Yeah, what?" "We're busy." The voice on the other end was calm. "My name is Mr. Alcott. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. William Kane. He would like to book the entire diner for a private lunch tomorrow at 1 p.m. The owner laughed. "You sure you got the right place?" "We do. He also requests that all current staff remain on duty. He insists on an authentic experience." That next afternoon, the diner was spotless. Tables were wiped twice. Floors were mopped until they shined. Lily wore her best apron, still frayed at the edges, but neatly ironed. At exactly 1 p.m., a black car pulled up. William stepped out, not in a suit, but in the same casual clothes he wore before. He entered alone, nodded at the owner, and took his usual seat in the corner. Lily approached, notebook in hand. "Welcome back. Can I get you?" "No order today," he interrupted. "Just came to talk." She blinked, confused. "I hope you don't mind. I had a few questions I wanted to ask you." She nodded slowly. "Okay." He gestured for her to sit. She hesitated. I'll pay for the time, he added. Reluctantly, she slid into the booth across from him. How long have you been working here? He asked. 5 years. And your son? Caleb? He's 8. He's everything. I can see that, William said, then paused. What would you do if you didn't have to work double shifts just to survive? The question made her uncomfortable. I don't know. Maybe go back to school. Study something real. Get Caleb into a better hospital. But dreams don't pay bills. And if they did? She looked at him. Something in his tone didn't match his simple appearance. I'm sorry, but why do you care? She asked. William reached into his pocket and placed a business card on the table. William Kane, she read aloud, eyes widening. The William Kane? He smiled faintly. I don't understand. Why are you here? Why us? He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Years ago, my mother was a waitress. Single mom. Raised me on her own. She worked nights, cleaned homes during the day, and always found time to read me bedtime stories. I never forgot the way she'd smile, even when her feet bled. He paused. You reminded me of her. Lily's eyes welled up, but she said nothing. Let me help you, he continued. Not out of pity, not as charity, but because the world needs people like you to win. I can't accept handouts, she replied, her voice shaky. This isn't a handout, he said. It's an investment. In a mother who never gives up. In a boy who deserves more. She stared at him, unable to form words. The next morning, she woke to find an envelope slid under her apartment door. Inside was a letter. Dear Lily, as of today, a trust fund has been created in Caleb's name for his medical care and education. You'll also find enrollment papers for a college of your choice, along with a stipend to cover your living expenses. A new apartment has been arranged nearby, rent-free for the next 5 years. This is not the end. This is the beginning. William Kane. Lily dropped to the floor in disbelief. She hugged Caleb tighter than ever, whispering prayers of gratitude. But even she didn't know what was coming next. For months, things changed rapidly. Caleb began therapy at one of the best children's hospitals in the city. Lily took night classes in business management. She walked the campus with a backpack and the biggest smile. One day, as she waited outside Caleb's session, a woman approached her. She wore a sleek blazer and had a notepad in hand. Are you Lily Evans? The woman asked. Yes. I'm with the Tribune. I'm doing a story on women who overcame hardship. I heard about your story and Mr. Kane. Lily hesitated. I'm not sure I want to be in the news. The woman nodded. Understandable. But someone needs to hear it. Someone else in your shoes might be waiting for a sign that it gets better. Lily glanced at Caleb through the window. He was laughing with a therapist, taking steps slowly between bars, each one stronger than the last. She smiled. All right, but only if the story is about him, not me. The article went viral, and that's when everything changed again. One morning, while Lily was preparing breakfast in her new apartment, there was a knock on the door. She opened it to find a young woman holding a worn-out duffel bag and a small girl with Down syndrome by her side. I'm sorry, the woman said, trembling. I read your story. I don't have anyone. I didn't know where else to go. Lily didn't even blink. She opened the door wide and stepped aside. Come in. You're safe now. And just like that, Lily realized maybe this was never just about her and Caleb. Maybe she was meant to become something more. What she didn't know was that William Kane was still watching, quietly, from a distance. And he had more in store, much more. But that part of the story is yet to be told. It had been 6 months since the article about Lily and Caleb took the internet by storm. The world had seen a poor waitress rise from the shadows of a forgotten diner to become a beacon of light for struggling single mothers. Her quiet resilience and unwavering love had inspired thousands, and soon, her modest apartment transformed into a place of refuge. One woman with a child turned into 3, then 5, and before she realized what was happening, Lily was running an unofficial shelter. The living room had sleeping bags and toy boxes scattered across the floor. The kitchen buzzed with shared stories and borrowed recipes. And the hallway walls were plastered with crayon drawings signed by little hands. She didn't have a roadmap or a grand plan, just a heart big enough to say yes when others would have said no. Word spread quickly in those silent channels of the forgotten, where desperate mothers whispered to one another in hospital waiting rooms and late-night shelters. Go to Lily. She'll help. But with every new arrival came a heavier weight. The stipend from Mr. Kane was generous, but even generosity had limits when you were feeding 10 mouths instead of 2. Lily stretched every dollar like it was elastic, worked on her online classes late into the night, and never once let Caleb see her worry. She hadn't heard from William since that letter. Not a call. Not a visit. It was as if he had vanished. She often wondered if he had been real at all. Sometimes it felt like a dream, a billionaire appearing in a diner and changing her life with a stroke of his pen. Then, on a stormy Wednesday evening, everything changed again. The power went out. Lily stood in the dark kitchen, holding a flashlight and calming a little girl who was afraid of thunder. The generator she had been saving for was still far out of reach, and now the food in the fridge was at risk. The kids were scared, and she felt the weight of all their hopes pressing down on her shoulders like a mountain. There was a knock. She opened the door, half expecting a neighbor, maybe a social worker. Instead, a man in a soaked black coat stood on her doorstep. "Miss Evans?" he asked. "Yes." "I'm with the Kane Foundation," he said, handing her a sealed envelope. She took it slowly, her fingers trembling. The man tipped his hat and left without another word. She tore open the envelope by candlelight. Inside was a letter and a key. "Dear Lily, you have built something beautiful, something the world desperately needs. But it's time to stop building it alone. Enclosed is the deed to the old Larchwood estate, located 2 hours outside the city. It has 22 bedrooms, a commercial kitchen, a library, a playground, and acres of land. It's yours now, no rent, no strings. A team will help you relocate. Your shelter deserves more than this small apartment. It deserves to breathe. We'll talk soon. WK." She dropped the letter to the table and sat down, stunned. Larchwood. She had heard of it. An old property once owned by a reclusive artist, now abandoned for years. Everyone said it was haunted by stories and silence. And now it was hers? That weekend, 3 black vans pulled up outside her apartment. Inside were movers, volunteers, and representatives from the Kane Foundation. They packed carefully, helping the children carry their toys and blankets, whispering softly as if they knew the sacredness of what they were transporting. Lily stood in the middle of it all, feeling like she was in the eye of a storm, still, calm, and unsure whether to cry or laugh. The drive to Larchwood was surreal. Trees lined the winding road like guards, and when the estate finally came into view, it was more than she had imagined. The house was old, yes, but majestic. Ivy crept up the stone walls like time trying to hold on, and the windows glowed with light that had been turned on just hours before their arrival. The children ran through the halls, their laughter echoing like bells. Bedrooms were chosen, the kitchen was stocked, and within a day it felt less like a mansion and more like a home. Lily walked through the corridors late that night, touching the wooden railings, the cool walls, the grand piano in the dusty music room. She didn't sleep. She couldn't, because something was coming. She could feel it in her bones. The next day, a black car pulled up the gravel driveway, and he stepped out. William Kane, dressed not in a disguise this time, but in a simple gray suit, his hair slightly grayer than she remembered, his eyes still full of storms and secrets. She met him at the front door. "You never said goodbye," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Because I knew it wasn't over." She didn't ask why he had returned. She simply let him in. They sat in the grand dining room, untouched since the days of oil paintings and candlelit dinners, now echoing with the sound of cartoons from the other room. "You've done more than I imagined," he said, looking around. "You didn't just help yourself. You helped everyone." "I couldn't say no," she said. "They reminded me of me." He nodded. "That's the problem with the world. Too many people saying no when they should be saying yes. She looked at him, searching for something. "Why are you really here, Mr. Kane?" He paused, then reached into his coat pocket. He placed a folder on the table. "Because I want to make it official." She opened the folder and gasped. Inside were documents, papers that would establish the Caleb House Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing housing, education, and medical care for single parents and disabled children. The foundation would be registered in Lily's name, with her as the director, backed entirely by the Kane fortune. This is too much," she said, her voice breaking. "No," he said softly. "This is exactly the right amount. I don't know how to run a foundation. You'll learn. You've already built one. I'm just giving it a name." She covered her mouth with her hands. Silent tears rolled down her cheeks. He stood, preparing to leave. "There's one more thing." She looked up. "In 2 weeks there's a gala. Hundreds of donors. People who write checks bigger than most people's homes. I want you to be the keynote speaker." "Me?" She laughed in disbelief. "I've never spoken in front of more than a PTA meeting." "You'll speak from your heart. That's what they need to hear." "I don't know if I can." "You once didn't know if you could raise a son in a diner," he said. "But you did." She watched him walk out the door again. This time, it didn't feel like goodbye. The next 2 weeks flew by in a blur of preparation. Public speaking coaches were sent in. Wardrobe consultants. A small team helped her refine her story, not to dramatize it, but to crystallize it, to make sure the world heard not just about struggle, but about triumph. The night of the gala arrived. The ballroom was golden and filled with people in tuxedos and gowns, sipping wine and making donations between courses. The air buzzed with money and power. And then Lily walked onto the stage. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair pinned up. She looked out at the sea of strangers and took a breath. "My name is Lily Evans," she began, voice trembling. "And I used to think the world had forgotten people like me." The room fell silent. She told her story. The diner. The braces on Caleb's legs. The grilled cheese sandwich. The billionaire in the corner booth. But more than that, she spoke about hope. About how one yes can ripple across 100 lives. About how the richest thing in the world is the ability to give. When she finished, there was no polite applause. There was a standing ovation. That night, the Caleb House Foundation received more donations than anyone expected. Enough to open 5 more shelters. Enough to build a hospital wing. Enough to change even more lives. And back at Larchwood, as the lights dimmed and the kids finally slept, Lily sat by the window, holding Caleb's hand. He looked up at her with sleepy eyes. "Did they like your story, Mommy?" She smiled. "They did." "Did they clap?" "They did." "Can I tell my story too?" She kissed his forehead. "One day, sweet boy. And it'll be even better than mine." Outside, the stars stretched across the sky like a promise. And somewhere in the distance, William Kane sat alone, reading the article the next morning. The headline read, "Waitress turned founder changes lives, one yes at a time." He smiled, folded the paper, and whispered to no one, "This is only the beginning." But what neither of them knew was that a storm was coming. Not of rain or thunder, but something darker. Something that would test everything they had built. And once again, the world would watch what Lily Evans would do next. The storm didn't arrive with warning signs. There were no dark clouds, no sudden winds. It came silently, hidden behind polished smiles and firm handshakes. It started with a phone call, one Lily barely remembered. A woman named Renee Caldwell, introduced as a compliance officer from the Department of Charitable Oversight. Her tone was friendly, clipped, and professional, but something in it made Lily's stomach tighten. "Just a routine inquiry," Renee had said. "Standard paperwork, a few signatures, nothing more." But then came another call. Then a subpoena. Then a full audit. Within days, lawyers were combing through every receipt, every grant, every whispered promise made during those chaotic, hopeful early days. And when you build something with heart before you build it with structure, cracks show fast. They questioned the housing arrangements. How are tenants chosen? They questioned the money. Are you trained in managing these funds? They even questioned Caleb. Is your son's image being used for sympathy marketing? Lily's hands shook as she signed document after document, her name starting to feel like a weight, not a person. She didn't understand the language of legal jargon. She only understood hungry kids and tired mothers and nights spent figuring out how to make 6 packs of ramen last week. The media changed, too. The same headlines that once praised her now turned cold. Untrained founder accused of mismanagement. Is Caleb House just a front for good PR? Where is William Kane now? That was the question on everyone's lips. Kane had disappeared again. The mansion felt cold without his quiet confidence echoing in the halls. Lily called, emailed, even sent handwritten letters. But days turned into weeks, and there was no word, no reply. She was alone again. One night, after the children had gone to sleep, she sat in the study. The fire had long since died, and the silence pressed in. The walls of Larchwood, once full of life, now felt like a museum of fading memories. She stared at the framed photo on the desk, her and Caleb, grinning on the porch the day they moved in. The foundation's logo was in the corner. Back then, the world believed in miracles. Now they believed in scandal. A soft knock interrupted the silence. It was Mia, a 17-year-old girl who had been staying with them for nearly 2 months. She was pregnant, terrified, and strong in ways Lily couldn't explain. I heard them talking downstairs, Mia whispered. The volunteers. They think you're going to shut this place down. Lily's throat tightened. I don't know what's going to happen. You changed my life, Miss Lily, Mia said, her voice trembling. You made me believe I was more than a mistake. Tears welled in Lily's eyes, but she forced herself to smile. You are more, no matter what happens here. But the truth was, Lily felt the ground crumbling beneath her feet. The next morning, 3 government vehicles pulled up the driveway. They came with files, questions, and the kind of faces that didn't smile. Lily met them at the door, dressed in her best blazer, heart pounding so loudly she couldn't hear her own voice. The meeting lasted hours. They said the foundation was under official investigation. There were discrepancies in the financial reports, nothing criminal, but enough to raise eyebrows. The board, which had been hastily assembled with good intentions, was being dissolved. Funding was frozen. The shelter's future now depended on a court decision. When they left, Lily collapsed on the floor of the empty foyer. She didn't cry. She couldn't. She had cried enough in the diner's back room. She had cried when Caleb was diagnosed. She had cried in hospital parking lots and food stamp lines. But now, tears felt like a luxury. Instead, she got up. She cooked dinner. She helped Caleb with his reading. She read Mia's draft of a college application essay. And that night, she wrote something of her own. A letter. To the press. To the world. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a businesswoman. I'm not a saint. I am a mother who got tired of waiting for someone else to fix the world. Yes, I made mistakes. I didn't always know what form to fill or which department to call. But I never spent a cent on myself. I never turned away a child. I never lied about who I was. If that's not enough for you, so be it. But it will always be enough for me. She posted it online and went to bed. By morning, it had gone viral. The hashtags began to spread. Hashtag stand with Lily. Hashtag Caleb How Strong. Hashtag yes still means yes. People began sharing their stories. Mothers Lily had helped. Volunteers who had seen her work until sunrise. Nurses who remembered her sleeping on hospital chairs with Caleb in her arms. And then William Kane returned. He didn't arrive in a limousine. He came by taxi. He didn't wear a suit. He wore jeans, a gray hoodie, and eyes that carried regret. I'm sorry, he said when he saw her. I left you alone. I shouldn't have. Lily stared at him, a dozen responses caught in her throat. But instead she said, Why did you? I was sick, he replied simply. A diagnosis came out of nowhere. I didn't want to distract you with it. I disappeared the way I always have. I see now, that was a mistake I can't afford to make again. She didn't hug him. She didn't forgive him, not yet. But she nodded. And for now, that was enough. Kane stepped into action. His legal team arrived the next day. Not with noise, but with quiet efficiency. The audits were reviewed. The allegations of mismanagement were cleared. The board was reassembled, this time with experts and advocates who believed in the mission, but also understood the structure. And something shifted. The media stopped attacking. The donations returned. But something else had changed in Lily. She no longer wanted to be the face. She wanted to be the force behind the curtain. At the next press conference, she announced that the Caleb House Foundation would continue, but with a new director, one with the credentials she never had. Lily would stay on as founder and advocate, but she needed time to breathe, to raise her son, to remember what it felt like to be just a mother again. That night, she sat under the stars with Caleb, both wrapped in a blanket. "Are we going to be okay, Mommy?" he asked. She didn't rush to answer. She watched the sky, thought about the journey from diner to mansion to headlines to silence. "Yes," she said finally. "We already are." But deep in her heart, she knew the story wasn't over. Because in the corners of the city, more children needed help. And somewhere, someone like her was waiting for a single yes. What Lily didn't know was that this time, she wouldn't be the one saying it. Someone else was watching. A girl named Mia, with her belly round, her eyes steady, and a spark in her chest. A girl who had once been saved, now ready to save others. And that was how the next chapter would begin. Weeks passed. The sun hung a little higher each day over Larchwood, bathing the wide wraparound porch and its creaking swing in gentle gold. Spring arrived not with fanfare, but with subtle promises. The bloom of wildflowers near the gravel road, the soft laughter of children playing tag among the trees, and the distant hum of hammering as volunteers rebuilt the back shed that winter storms had battered. But underneath it all, there was a quiet energy. Something was shifting. Lily felt it each time she walked through the halls of Caleb House. The scent of pancakes on a Sunday morning. The distant hum of someone vacuuming. The way Caleb now wheeled himself from room to room like a tiny mayor, greeting everyone like old friends. Things had settled. Yes, but life had never felt more alive. William Kane had moved into a modest apartment nearby. He said the mansion belonged to the foundation now, where it belonged. He stopped trying to hide from the world. No more disguises. No more long business trips. He had learned something about love and consequence and time. Most importantly, he had learned that the cost of disappearing again was too high. Lily had forgiven him, not with a dramatic scene or teary confrontation, but in the small, quiet ways that matter most. She invited him to Caleb's 9th birthday party. She let him help with school pickup. She sat beside him during board meetings and listened when he spoke. Trust was being rebuilt brick by brick, word by word, moment by moment. Mia gave birth to a little girl in early April. She named her Grace, not because life had been kind, but because sometimes, even in pain, there was a reason to believe. She stayed at Caleb House for a while longer, helping with meals, folding laundry, mentoring new arrivals. But one evening, she came to Lily with a notebook and nervous eyes. "I've been writing something," she said. "A proposal. For a place. Like Caleb House. But smaller. For young moms. With daycare and therapy and education. I thought maybe you could look at it." Lily read it. Twice. Then she stood up, hugged Mia tight, and whispered, "Let's build it." And so, the spark that had once lit inside Lily in a quiet diner passed on. Mia's fire caught quickly. She began raising funds. She gave interviews. She spoke at churches and schools, and stood tall even when her voice trembled. She had been through the fire and come out shining. Lily was proud. More than that, she was hopeful. But just as the light returned in full, a shadow appeared one last time. It came in the form of an envelope. No stamps. No return address. Just her name, handwritten in black ink. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single photo, grainy, clearly taken from afar. It showed her hugging Caleb in the parking lot of the hospital last winter. Behind them, blurred in the background, stood a man in a gray jacket, holding a phone to his ear. The same jacket William had worn when he first arrived at the diner. A sticky note was attached. "You were never meant to see this." She stared at it for a long time. Her mind raced. Questions poured in like cold water. Had William been following her before they met? Had the diner scene been orchestrated? Why this picture? Why now? She brought it to him, laid it in front of him without a word. He didn't flinch. I figured this might come up someday, he said quietly. I was going to tell you. Tell me what? He leaned back, hands resting on his knees. After I walked away from my company, I was in a dark place. I didn't trust people. I didn't trust myself. But I had money, more than I could ever spend. I started watching, quietly, found people doing real work in the world. I wanted to understand why some people still gave a damn. Why they kept fighting when everything was broken. That's when I found you. Lily's heart pounded. You watched me. He nodded. I saw you feed Caleb with your last $5. I saw you give a homeless man your gloves in December. I saw you wipe tears off your face in that diner's freezer, then walk out smiling for your tables. She felt like the air had been sucked from the room. So you set the whole thing up? No, he said, voice firm. I didn't stage our meeting. I planned to help quietly. Maybe pay for Caleb's treatments, set up a trust. But then, I saw you in person, and everything I thought I knew fell apart. You weren't a project. You weren't an investment. You were a storm I walked into without a plan. He took a breath. I fell in love with your fight, with the way you showed up even when it hurt. I was afraid to tell you because I knew it would feel like a lie. She stood, walked to the window, arms crossed. And then she laughed, a soft, stunned sound. All this time, she said, shaking her head. And I thought I was the one with the secret. He looked up. I never told you, she continued, voice calmer now. But the night you walked into the diner, I had a letter in my pocket. A resignation letter. I was going to quit. I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't juggle the bills, the tears, the pitying looks. But then you showed up. And suddenly, the universe blinked. They stared at each other, years of silence and truths rising to the surface like slow dawn. So what do we do now, he asked. She turned to him fully. We start over. But this time, we do it with eyes open. And that was the final chapter of their old story, and the first page of something new. That summer, Mia's project broke ground. The ribbon cutting was attended by senators, celebrities, and mothers who had once slept in shelters and now owned homes. Caleb was the guest of honor, dressed in a miniature suit and tie, his smile lighting up the stage. Kane gave a quiet speech. No flash, just truth. Once, I believed money could fix everything. I was wrong. But I've learned something far more valuable, that healing begins when we stop running. From pain, from people, from ourselves. He paused. And sometimes, the smallest hands can lead you back home. The crowd stood, applauded, cried. And Lily? She stood in the back, watching, breathing, knowing the battle was never really over, but that they were winning. Not because they had wealth, not because they had power, but because they had each other. And sometimes, in a world filled with chaos, love born from truth is the only story that matters. In the quiet after the ceremony, as dusk painted the sky in soft orange and pink, Caleb wheeled himself beside her and tugged her sleeve. Mommy, he said, are we happy now? She crouched, kissed his forehead. We're not just happy, she whispered. We're free. And in that moment, beneath the falling light, everything, every trial, every tear, every twist of fate, made perfect, beautiful sense.